So, what can I say about the Spire of the Watcher video? Well, I guess this technically counts as it because I have to admit it is no longer my favorite dungeon. Because at the time I had only purchased the Witch Queen expansion dungeon key, and I thought that was the best one because, let's be honest, duality's kind of shit. And then I purchased the Lightful one and I realized those dungeons are infinitely better. Warlord's Ruin is really cool and really fun, it has a great soundtrack, and Ghost of the Deep looks pretty, has a cool exotic, and has cool armor. So I soon began to realize that I don't really want to write for the Spire of the Watcher video, simply because it's not that great anymore. It's kind of the feeling of nostalgia has worn off. I realize its flaws, and it has a lot of flaws. And starting with the big one is that I like the environment, but it does get a bit stale over time. There's not a lot of changes, and there's not a lot of impressive displays other than seeing the tower and then going down the tower. That's cool and all. And I also don't really like the mechanic where you just are a blue collar worker and you grab wires are cool the first time you do it, but then the next time you don't even follow the wires because you've memorized all the placements. It's just do this and then that thing happens. And I get that's most of Destiny, but the do this part has to be really fun. Like in Warlord's Ruin, you have to go on these things that activate a damage phase, and hell, even in the first encounter you get lifted up into a fucking cage that you have to shoot eyes or else you die, and it's a really cool because you just teleport in there. And Spire of the Watcher, it never changes, even slightly. It's always just wires. I guess in the end, it technically changes because you have to trap them in the room, but the way you trap them in the room is just by shooting them again. And it gets really old, it gets really boring, and I still like it. It's still definitely one of my favorite dungeons, but it's not my favorite anymore. I also just don't like how the middle boss is just kind of reused from the Garden of Salvation. It's a cool callback, but in reality kind of boring and wasting. I think if it's a dungeon key, which you're paying money for, you should get the most out of it. You should get completely new shit, complete new areas, and a lot of content, because it is a lot. It's $20 Canadian. Maybe us in America. And I just think that overall it's not really worth your money simply because duality isn't that good. And Spire of the Watcher, while the cosmetics are really dope, you could say that about Ghost of the Deep because his cosmetics are even cooler, the way that the armor interacts with your shaders. I don't really have any opinions on the guns per se. I know Tech's Scout Rifle's got a buff recently, I think a 33% buff that gives them more damage, and I know you can get a text resolver from Scout Rifle from the dungeon, but it's just like, that's just it. See, the thing that I've realized is that what makes a dungeon a really good dungeon is good theming, especially for me. I'm a sucker for environments and music and looking pretty, and this whole time, from the outside perspective, it's a kind of just meant to be like a cowboy dungeon, but it isn't really. The gear's just cowboy. The extra environment, other than a tumbleweed that flies by in the first few seconds, isn't really that cowboy. It's more of just a Rasputin area, and that's fine, but you've been in a Rasputin area before. The Fallen Saber Strike, the Wrath of the Machine raid, that whole time on Mars, it's just like, it's gotten stale. It's not a unique environment anymore. You've seen all this Warmind shit before it, so it's not that exciting. And then Warlord's Ruin, you're in a goddamn castle up in a mountain, which is really interesting. And with the Taken and the Scorn, very interesting combo. We've seen the Soul Divisive a shit ton more than we've seen those two together. And in Ghost of the Deep, you go underwater in Titan. That's just crazy because it's underwater and you can die underwater. It was something really, really, really I was really invested in the dungeon. And it's just Warlord's Ruin, Ghost of the Deep, they're just simply much better and much more worth their money than Spire of the Watcher. I think Spire of the Watcher is a good dungeon. I'm not going to deny that. It's 100% better than Duality and fucking Shattered Throne, the shit that is Shattered Throne. But, like, those are both pretty bad ones. And it's just, I've lost all motivation to make a video about it. It's not as good as I thought it was. And honestly, it's worn off now. I gotta say it. And honestly, if I were to pick a dungeon to make a video on, I'd choose Warlord's Ruin, because it's just simply way better in every way. I think the exotic is even better. I've had plenty of time to do it, and I think I'm just not gonna make it. I guess this counts as it if you're thinking really hard, but it's just not a good dungeon for me, I guess. The things that I'm looking for in a Destiny experience should be grandiose. I think a dungeon should be a lot like a mini raid, in my opinion. I think it should do the same things that a raid does, but in a shorter type of way. Like, Deepstone Crypt is my favorite raid, but that's solely because of the environment and the storytelling and literally everything else surrounding it. It's beautiful. It has great music, and that's why I like those two dungeons as well, because they have the same thing that has, but Spire of the Watcher really doesn't. So at the end of the day, what's my opinion about Spire of the Watcher is that it's not a bad dungeon. Its gear is pretty up there if you're looking for more unique stuff. Leather, cowboy gear, it's great. The Hunter Cloak is awesome, even though I have yet to get it. It's not a bad dungeon, but if you have the money and you want to buy a dungeon key, just get the Lightfall one. It is way better, and honestly, I might make a video on Spire of the Watcher or Ghost of the Deep, because that's how much fun I've had with them. There's a fucking cricket in the background of this audio. I swear to God, if that shows up, I'm gonna scream.